Be my friend? Godfather?
I've always had this deep fascination with the mafia. Over the years, I've seen just about every major mafia film you can think of. But by far the greatest one will always be The Godfather. This was the film that presented the Italian mafia in an entirely different light. Truly, it was a compelling story that told the tale of the rise and the fall of the Corleone family in New York City. It also starred one of the most remarkable casts ever assembled. The film grossed well over $300 million in box office sales when it was released in 1972. And many people to this day consider The Godfather to be one of the most influential films of all time, and for plenty of good reasons. Whether you're discussing the dynamic and engaging story, the characters and the dialogue, or the masterful scenes, there are few films that have made such an impact on the movie industry as The Godfather did. Of course, that can't be said about the Godfather video game for the PlayStation 2 and Xbox. Yeah, in case you didn't know, there was a third-person open-world game titled The Godfather, released by EA Games in 2006. Why exactly did EA Games go about creating a movie licensed game for an intellectual property over 30 years old? Well, in this retrospective, I hope to answer that question, along with discussing what exactly makes The Godfather stand out in the vast sea of open-world action games. Yeah, on the surface, The Godfather looks like a poor imitation of Grand Theft Auto. Everything from the wanted system to the stealing of cars to the completion of mission objectives screams ripoff. But what EA gave us back in 2006 was a chance to immerse ourselves within the rich narrative of the Godfather story. And although their execution wasn't exactly spot on, this game still deserves some notable mention. So without further delay, let's go ahead and get started. And if you're new to the channel, make sure you subscribe so you can check out my other retrospective videos. 2006 was notable for the release of the Nintendo Wii and PlayStation 3, but it was also the year that Paramount Studios, the production company behind the Godfather film, purchased DreamWorks. Under Paramount Studios, DreamWorks would oversee the production or restoration of the 1972 film The Godfather. Now, I expressed earlier how popular the film was. Well, since its theatrical release in 1972, The Godfather was a victim of its own success. Within the US alone, the film made $135 million, and that's because Paramount reproduced large numbers of the original reel to ship to theaters nationwide. As a result, the original negatives were just too worn down from overprinting, and the duplicates, well, those have been lost within the Paramount archives. And with that, DreamWorks began to work on restoring the Godfather movie. And as a result, we got the Francis Ford Coppola restoration in 2008. Now, I'm only bringing this up to show you that there was a growing interest among film lovers during the time EA began drawing up plans for the Godfather video game. Like many movie licensed video games, this title was used as a convenient way to promote the film itself. Particularly for a film like The Godfather, which was actually given several accolades during this time, a video game could serve to not only entice long-term movie fans, but also attract new ones. Work for The Godfather video game began around March of 2004. Working on the game would be EA Redwood, the same company that would be rebranded to Visceral Games, creators of the Dead Space series. The first taste we got of the game was at the Spike TV Video Game Awards in 2004, where EA unveiled a brief pre-rendered cutscene that offered no details of the gameplay or story. It was here where The Godfather was announced to hit the shelves in fall of 2005. Now to this point, EA Games had mainly been known for titles like Madden and the Medal of Honor series. The company had never ventured into making M-rated games before. However, it was the success of the GTA series that convinced them to venture into creating their own mature-rated game. When in the early stages of development, EA was totally reluctant to reveal any major details about the game. It was probably because the team had no idea how they could translate a film over 30 years old into a video game. For that reason, EA entrusted the project to senior producer Hunter Smith, the same producer behind 007 Nightfire. In 2005, he expressed in an IGN article that The Godfather would be an open-world game similar to the GTA series that would take place in the 1940s and 50s. Smith acknowledged that EA wanted to make a title in the same style as the previous open-world games, but with a strong background that required the player to build human relationships while creating their own story, whatever that means. Particularly, they would feature cinematic sequences that would allow the player to interact with their environment and NPCs. Keep in mind though that when EA unveiled this information, the game was only around 15% complete. We wouldn't hear anything else about the game until the following month when it was revealed that EA was able to cast actors from the original film to provide voice work for the upcoming release. EA was actually able to get Marlon Brando, James Caan, and Robert Duvall to reprise their roles as Don Vito Corleone, Sonny Corleone, and Tom Hagen. They not only provided their voices, but also their likenesses as well. The only major actor from the film they couldn't get was Al Pacino, who lent his likeness to another GTA clone, Scarface the World Is Yours from Radical Entertainment. Indeed, there was plenty of hype for the Godfather video game, and EA didn't cheap out in promoting the game to the public. Not only had they cast top-notch actors, but they also organized a red carpet event in Little Italy, New York to show off the first preview of the game. And following this was the demo, which was featured at E3 in 2005. In both of these events, EA was making a lot of promises that they couldn't deliver upon when the game actually did release. At the press events, people like the executive producer of the game, David DeMartini, would often stress that the player's experience would be shaped by factors of respect and family. They also claimed that there would be repercussions for the choices you make throughout the game. But the biggest claim that threw me off during my research of this game was the claim that the life you lead will actually form part of the Godfather's narrative. Yeah, so much for creating your own story. And frankly, wouldn't some of the choices you make within the game actually contradict some of the main parts of the story? The Godfather would prove to be an easy game for EA to promote, but making the actual game would prove to be fairly complicated. Now let's talk about the game itself. Where to begin? Well, how about the beginning? You start out in the year 1936, 9 years before the events of the film, where you meet Aldo Trapani, a boy who just witnessed his father brutally gunned down by the main rival of the Corleone family, the Barzini family. In this early segment of the game, you learn about the interesting fighting controls. Unlike other open world games, you don't throw a punch with a regular action button, rather you use an analog stick to perform punches. Additionally, you can grab and hold opponents by holding L1 and then striking them by moving the analog stick. This works, but not well. Often you'll find yourself not landing punches in the way you want, and basically you're forced to hold on to opponents whenever it's convenient. After the death of Aldo's family, the game jumps to 1945 during the famous opening wedding scene of the film. We don't see any of the actual wedding though, so much for immersing yourself in the story, as the game jumps to Don Corleone in his den conducting business. It's here where Aldo's mother asks Don Vito Corleone to look after her son. You see, she's worried that her son fell into a wrong crowd, so naturally she wants the head of a mafia family to include her son in a criminal organization. I guess it would have been too hard to ask the Don to pay for her son's college fund. Oh, and apparently this guy Aldo was in the army or something and just came home from the war, despite being only 18 years old in 1945, the same year that World War II ended. The scene shifts to the intimidating soldier of the Corleone family, Luca Brasi, who's now taken Aldo under his tutelage. Under Luca Brasi, we learn some of the more basic gameplay elements such as fighting, shooting, and extortion. Now, I wouldn't be exaggerating by saying that The Godfather is a complete Grand Theft Auto ripoff. I would even argue that The Godfather itself is a cheap imitation of the beloved series. Beginning with the general gameplay, you travel the city by stealing cars and performing missions for shady characters. The world space itself serves as a recreated New York City along with some sections of New Jersey. Within the world space, Aldo navigates through the notably dense and packed city streets of New York. Good luck not crashing into any cars or running into any pedestrians while evading the police or completing time tasks. The streets, I guess, much like New York, are tightly packed and offer little breathing room for commuters. Navigating these dense streets can get confusing and frustrating if you don't take a break to look at your map. While traveling the city, you'll constantly be harassed by policemen responding to your crimes. Just like in Grand Theft Auto, The Godfather features a wanted system. Only instead of stars, you get badges. The more badges you get, the more heat you gain. The only thing is, police in the game aren't that much of a threat. Sure, they can arrest you and kill you at times, but the police badge eventually fades away and cops lose interest. Other than the cops, Otto will also have to deal with rival families. For some reason, EA Redwood decided to make the 5 families, let's say, color coordinated, meaning that all the families can be identified by a certain color. I'm not really sure why they decided to have the 5 families dressed up like characters from Dick Tracy, but it was probably added just to tell the crime outfits apart. Although EA Redwood wished to create an immersive environment for the player, they failed to keep my interest in the world.
The heart of New York. You got all those famous landmarks that you've seen in pictures, the big hotels.
I'm sort of impressed of how dull and drab EA Redwood made an exciting city like New York look. Honestly, don't expect to be blown away by any locations in the cities or in the interior locations as well, as they all share a certain lifeless quality. Speaking of locations, well, they range from storefronts, warehouses, clubs, hotels. You come across these all throughout the city, and yeah, like I said before, they basically all look the same. In terms of controls, The Godfather provides the typical third-person experience. Other than the awful fighting controls, you can also grapple and strangle opponents. I found this to be the most effective way of handling melee combat, as strangling can be done by just pressing down on both analog sticks while holding L1. For firepower, you're provided a standard set of guns from the small snub-nosed 38 Special to the Chicago Typewriter, or otherwise known as the Thompson machine gun. You can target your opponents with the R1 button and line up your shot accurately by just waiting a few seconds. In gun battles, you can take cover by hitting the square button and crouching down with the right analog stick. And while in close quarters, you can perform a few gun executions. My favorite is the classic garrote used to strangle opponents from behind. Within these gun battles, EA kinda redeems themselves, as you can be killed just as easily as you could kill other NPCs. I typically found myself dying by just one shot to the head multiple times. As you're playing, you have to make sure that you upgrade your abilities as well. That's right, The Godfather does feature a pretty functioning way to upgrade your character's abilities, from shooting to health to running. Perhaps the most attractive feature of the Godfather video game is the ability to gain control of various businesses around the city and extort money from owners and racketeer operators. Extortion is basically the true meat of the game, as these locations can be found on just about every city block. You learn how to extort businesses very early in the game, meaning that you can begin earning money immediately. To extort a business, all you have to do is walk into the store and press triangle to extort the owner. And if they refuse, which they certainly will, you have to do your best to change their minds. You have the option of hitting them until you can break their will, or smashing up their store until you break their will. You can also repeatedly point your gun at them, but this method does take longer. Additionally, you have to be careful not to go too far. If you hit or threaten them past their breaking point, they might flat out refuse you. And naturally, if you accidentally kill them, well, you can't extort any money from them. Once you successfully extorted a business owner, you can then move on to gaining control of the racket operating in the background. These rackets usually look like warehouses or supply hubs where you must reach the racketeer operator. The more businesses you take over, the stronger you make Alpo, and the more respect you gain over time. As much as EA wanted to give the player a way to insert themselves into the Godfather narrative, it always seems a little forced. Going back to the previous claims, there was never really any attempt to incorporate a choice system or a repercussion system within the game whatsoever. Most likely, they were just saying this stuff to further promote the game and to spark interest, when in reality, they had to make compromises at the end of the day. Keep in mind that The Godfather was a 30-year-old film based on a book that was even older. Well, not that old. You see, the Godfather novel was actually written in 1969, only about 3 years before a film was actually made. Naturally, Paramount Studios couldn't exactly translate the entire book within a film, in the same way that EA games couldn't translate the entire film into a video game. So we have to expect there to be some limitations. And to a certain extent, we see some of these limitations within the various missions of the game. In a few instances, EA completely waters down some of the better, more subtle scenes in order to provide some action gameplay. For instance, in one mission, Aldo has to escort Fredo and the dying Don Corleone to the hospital directly after the assassination attempt made by the Tattaglia family. In this mission, you have to use a vehicle to keep assassins at bay and fend off attackers on the Callahan Bridge, only to have to get the Don to the hospital before he bleeds out. Or how about the mission where you need to assassinate Polygato, the guy who was actually scheduled to drive the Don that day? Rather than having Aldo just shoot Paulie in the back of the head, he instead has to chase Paulie through a field of gasoline cans. These two examples here really speak to the problem of trying to adapt a classic film to a video game. And in this game particularly, it seems that they were trying to conveniently add action segments to scenes that didn't require that much action in the first place. At the same time, we can't say that about every scene or mission in the game. There are a few missions that work to add tremendously to the story. For instance, there's the mission where Aldo travels to Hollywood, California to convince director Jack Waltz to feature singer and godson to Vito Corleone, Johnny Fontaine, to star in his next film. If you're a fan of the original movie, then you'll remember that Jack Waltz was trying to blacklist Fontaine from the film industry as revenge for stealing the heart of one of his top actresses. In this mission, you travel with soldier Rocco Lampone to sneak into the Waltz estate and decapitate his horse. Next, you sneak through his large mansion to place the horse right on the director's bed. And in another mission, Aldo has to help Michael Corleone escape New York after he assassinates the Turk and the corrupt police sergeant, Sergeant McCluskey. Within this mission, you have to avoid Tattaglia bodyguards and make it to the boat before your vehicle is too damaged. Not only does the Godfather video game incorporate scenes from the film, but it also features some of the most detailed likenesses found in characters in movie-based games, along with featuring the original voices as well. And one interesting thing to add, this was actually some of the last dialogue that Marlon Brando recorded right before his death. Now, The Godfather obviously falls short of offering players the ultimate open world experience, but the game still provides plenty of other features that gamers and fans of the film will enjoy. That concludes this retrospective. Thanks for watching, guys, and please make sure you subscribe to the channel if you haven't by now. That way you can keep track of my future retrospective videos, along with my daily live streams as well. This is Bob of Smoking Fiend Productions signing off. Peace out, y'all, and stay safe out there.